going through our final 16 legends to pick who is, in our opinion, the greatest sports legend of all time.
Willie Mays versus Jim Brown.
All right. Ted Williams versus Babe Ruth.
You were one of the masters at that.
The master.
Let's talk Russell for a second.
He's facing someone who is considered one of the greatest Olympic athletes ever in Carl Lewis.
Impossible.
Can you bring back Farzy from the bathroom? Where is he?
You guys just keep giving me the hard ones here. Can I do eeny meeny?
All right, you guys better make sure y'all get this on camera.
Next up is Wilt versus Joe Dimaggio.
No time to waste. So Murph, let's go. Hello and welcome to our show. Over a 20-year period, GSL has profiled 206 of the greatest athletes of the 20th century. In our last episode, we started with 32 of the greatest legends and put them into a bracket to choose our best. We're down to the final 16. No time to waste, so Murph, let's go.
All right, so first up, we've got Willie Mays versus Oscar Robertson.
In almost every ranking of the greatest players ever, Willie ranks either 1 or 2 simply because he did it all. He hit for average, hit home runs, amazing defensive center fielder. Willie Mays is right up there in every metric, in every category. Phenomenal athlete, probably could have led the league in stolen bases if he wanted to.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you're saying. But remember, the Big O is no slouch. I mean, we're talking about the man who pre-Jordan was considered universally the greatest guard in NBA history, right? He got anywhere he wanted on the court, and he made his shot. He averaged over 10 assists per game for 5 seasons. The guy was the definition of great. You can't argue that.
But is he on par with Willie? I'm going to be honest, I don't think so.
And you know what? Truth be told, neither do I.
What?
Yeah, I agree.
So that means Willie advances. Let's go.
All right. Next up, we have Ted Williams versus Babe Ruth. Of course, we all know Ruth completely transformed the game of baseball with his power hitting, but he was also a great pitcher. You knew that, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, sir. But I've got a little bit of trivia for you, my friend.
Okay.
True or false now? Ted Williams was also drafted as a pitcher.
You know, it feels a little bit like a trick question. I think you want me to say true, so I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to say false on that.
Let's let the splendid Splinter provide this answer.
There was a Coast League team here, San Diego Padres, and I was signed as a pitcher outfielder. Pitcher outfielder.
Pitcher first and then outfielder?
Well, I'm not sure of that.
Voila. So it's true. But being considered by many experts to be the greatest hitter of all time, is that enough to beat the great Bambino?
No. I mean, think about it. Babe Ruth is, well, he's Babe Ruth, right? We have an adjective we use to describe gargantuan feats. They're Ruthian. Babe is simply a legendary figure, and I think the records speak for themselves. We got to go with the Babe. Next up is Wilt versus Joe Dimaggio. Now, these are getting tougher and tougher. The 100-point man versus the 56-game hitting streak man. And here's a bit of trivia about Joe Dimaggio you may not have known straight from the horse's mouth.
Joe, after you hit in 56 consecutive games, you were stopped in Cleveland and then immediately started on a 16-game hitting streak.
That's right, 16 more. Mm-hmm.
So he hit safely in 72 of 73 games. Not too bad. But is that enough to beat the Big Dipper?
No, because Wilt is to basketball what Ruth was to baseball. Completely transformational, the most dominant hoops player ever, right? Forget Michael Jordan, forget LeBron James, forget them all. Wilt towered over the sport, both figuratively and literally. And while he said nobody loves Goliath, well, I'm showing him a little bit of love right now. I'm going with Goliath. Chamberlain, moving on. Next up, Jim Brown versus Jackie Robinson.
It's hard to argue against the first black player to play in the majors, but Jim Brown is the NFL's version of Superman. Now, yes, Robinson was a 4-sport star at UCLA, but Brown was an All-American lacrosse player.
GSL once asked Chuck Bednarik, you know, the Hall of Fame two-way player for the Philadelphia Eagles, who was the greatest runner he ever faced. His response was instantaneous and emphatic. He said it was Jim Brown.
It seems that we are actually here in agreement the great Jackie Robinson is defeated by the one and only Jim Brown.
When we come back, it's the Buckeye Bullet, Jesse Owens versus Big Red, Secretariat.
Here comes Secretariat. He's moving fast. He's going for the lead, and it's right now he's looking for it.
Welcome back to GSL Then and Now. We're going through our final 16 legends to pick who is, in our opinion, the greatest sports legend of all time. So let's continue. Next up, Jesse Owens and Secretariat.
I already know where this is about to go. Let's start here from the beginning, okay? Secretariat's the greatest thoroughbred racehorse in history. But it's a tough hill to climb to beat the legendary Jesse Owens, Murph.
It is, especially since I am philosophically opposed to, pitting an animal versus a human in this bracket. So, for me, while acknowledging the greatness of Secretariat, I get it. This is a no-brainer. It's got to be Jesse Owens.
I'm with you on that one, Murph. It's got to be the Buckeye Bullet advancing to our Elite Eight. I know you're happy because we're moving on from the horse.
All right. Glad I didn't have to argue that one anymore. Next up, Walter Payton versus Hank Aaron, one of the greatest running backs against the man who broke Babe Ruth's home run record.
This one's tough. The first jersey I ever had was a Walter Payton jersey, and he's a special athlete, close to my heart. But I think Aaron has him by like a hair.
Or maybe even a little bit more. I agree.
Okay.
Henry Aaron, moving on.
Our next matchup is Pele, the great soccer legend, versus Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, it's almost impossible to judge these two, but that's our job. So let's get to it.
It is indeed. And while we may have a bias towards our American sports heroes, we have to recognize that Pele was the Babe Ruth of soccer, right? He was known throughout the world. So we have the greatest soccer player ever against one of the greatest hoop players ever. That's pretty telling, right? The greatest versus one of the greatest. I got to go with Pele.
I see what you did there with the whole one of versus the great. I saw what you did there, little three-card Monty. But I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I happen to think Kareem is in the argument for the greatest center in basketball history. Hello, most total points scored. He was so great that in college, they changed the rules to outlaw dunking because of him. It just wasn't fair. He was too good. He was a winner, too. I'm with Kareem. Hey, Farzi, tell me you're with me on this.
Another tough one, and it really pains me to say this because I'm certainly not a soccer guy, but I am a little bit of a football guy, if you get the international drift there, and nobody tops Pele, most goals ever, youngest to win a World Cup. I got to go Pele over Kareem. Sorry, deal with it.
Yes. No, we're going to disagree on that one. But here's your answer, Pele. Let's move on to the great Bill Russell versus Carl Lewis. Let's talk Russell for a second. Phenomenal athlete, we all know that, but it was his understanding of the game and the people who played it that also set him apart.
The psych out was very essential to you. I think you were probably one of the masters at that.
The master.
The master, okay. Who would be second?
I don't know. A lot of runner-ups.
All right, so Russell was not shy about his talents, and deservedly so, but he's facing someone who is considered one of the greatest Olympic athletes ever in Carl Lewis. So, what do you think?
Look, I'm a big Russell fan, but as far as individual talent goes, it has to be Lewis. Why? You think about the gold medals, 9. I'd put him in the top 4 Olympic champions ever.
All right, by the way, Russell was also a gold medal winner in the 1956 Olympics and unsurprisingly was captain of that team, 5-time NBA MVP, and as he pointed out, a master of the psychological game. Once he said the idea isn't to block every shot, it is just to make your opponent think you might block every shot. For me, I'm going with Bill Russell.
I see that. Impasse.
Guys, like I said, these keep getting harder and harder when you toss it to me here. I got to go with you, Wes. I got to say that Carl Lewis is the athlete to go to.
Boo.
Whoa, Murph, how do you boo an American legend? Unless you're booing me. That's understandable. I get it. When we return, we're going to continue to count down through our Elite Eight on our way to number 1 on Greatest Sports Legends Then and Now.
Welcome back to Greatest Sports Legends Then and Now. We're picking our greatest sports legend in a 32 legend bracket, and we're down to our final 8. First up, Willie Mays versus Carl Lewis. Murph, we're getting down to the legends that are honestly quite difficult to separate, but that's what we're paid to do, so let's do it.
All right, let's do it, no doubt. Willie Mays versus Carl Lewis. This may be just my way of looking at things, but could Willie Mays run like the wind and jump like a gazelle? Yes, he could. Could he hit a ball 400 feet away with a tiny, thin piece of wood? Yes, he could. Could he chase a ball running at full speed, dive on the grass, catch it backhanded while eating a mouthful of turf? Yes, we've seen him do it. Mays could do it all, and that's why I'm going with Willie.
So your argument is coming down to hand-eye coordination? I mean, like, how do you even know that Carl Lewis didn't have those same skills?
Well, I don't know that he didn't. He may have had them at some level, but his sport doesn't demand it. I'll take a ball athlete with that hand-eye coordination over a track athlete every day.
When we're talking about guys this great, I get it. Sometimes something's got to set them apart. I concede. I'm with you. Willie moves on to the Final Four. Next up, Babe Ruth versus Pele. When you look at these two guys, you see one of them, Pele, running towards the goal like Baryshnikov in sneakers as pure poetry in motion. And then you see Babe, the other guy, lumbering, waddling around the bases like a guy stumbling out of a corner bar after having, shall we say, a few.
Yeah, okay. But here's the thing, and Ted Williams said it often. Hitting a baseball is the toughest thing in the world to do in sports.
Well, of course Ted's going to say that. Ted played baseball. But is that harder than a bicycle kick?
Okay, great question. And since I can't answer it, I won't. But I will say this. In addition to home runs, Ruth hit for average, right? 342. He was a really good pitcher in his early days as well. He could do it all in one of the toughest sports, Babe Ruth.
Look, in my opinion, these two are giants of the sports world. They were both transformational athletes in their respective sports. So here goes. My heart's with the Babe. And that's where I'm at. Don't tweet me.
All right, I'm with you too. And so we have to bid adieu to the legendary Pele. He made it this far, and that's saying something, but Babe's moving on.
All right, getting down to it. Wilt Chamberlain, the Dipper, versus Henry Aaron.
All right, well, Wilt first. There's one word and one word only, and it's dominance, right? We've talked about it, the 100-point game, the 50-point average over the season, et cetera, et cetera. Come on, that's insanity. He was the best player the moment he arrived.
But so was Aaron. You know, everyone talks about Willie Mays being the best player of his era, and maybe he was, but maybe he wasn't. Maybe Aaron was. Hank had a better lifetime average than Mays, more hits, more runs, more home runs than Mays. I'm going with Henry Aaron, the man who broke Ruth's record, who everybody said that record would not be broken.
All right, can you bring back Farzi from the bathroom? Where is he? Because I think we need his arbitration skills at this point. Farzi?
All right, well, I wasn't in the bathroom. I was getting your next clip queued up. Wilt was the most dominant player of his sport ever. So you got to go Wilt over Hank.
And so we advance. All right, next in our bracket, Jim Brown versus Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens was a tremendous sprinter and long jumper who had a historic legacy at the Berlin Olympics back in 1936. Wes, I don't know. This is a tough one. Which way you headed?
This one's tough for me because, like, Brown falls in that Wilt category, all right? Someone so completely dominant in his era, some would say he may be the best football player ever.
Yeah.
Look at you agreeing with me. Now, see, I'm not going to lie. I'm one of those inclined to think Brown is better. Do you say so?
I do. I agree. Brown moves on.
All right. And so we're down to 4, Mays, Brown, Ruth, and Wilt. Who's the greatest? We'll find out when Greatest Sports Legends Then and Now continues.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Greatest Sports Legends Then and Now as we pick our number 1 legend.
All right, let's get into it. Willie Mays versus Jim Brown. Oh, man, like, how do you choose between these two?
I know. You get down to the Final Four, it becomes really difficult. So we've talked about Jim Brown, certainly one of, if not the greatest football player of all time. Willie Mays, certainly one of the greatest baseball players of all time. You know, this is hard because you're comparing eras, you're comparing different sports and, different skills. And I'm a baseball guy, and I'll argue for the baseball guys most of the time. But, man, you think back to what Jim Brown was able to do in his career in the NFL, I'm leaning towards Jim Brown.
When I think about Jim Brown, a somewhat short career, always winning, always consistent. I love the fact that he did what all of the greats always know to do. Always leave him wanting more.
Yeah.
And he knew exactly when to leave. So as far as I'm concerned, Jim Brown is our winner.
Wow. So we're in agreement.
We're in
Jim
agreement
Brown
today.
moving on to the final 2.
All right, so now we've come to another huge matchup. Babe Ruth versus Wilt Chamberlain. Is it fair to say that Wilt Chamberlain is the Babe Ruth of basketball?
Right.
Now, mind you, he broke every record in the book like Ruth, larger-than-life personality.
But just the way you phrased that question, Wes, just the way you set that up makes you have to lean towards Babe. Because if you have to ask, is Wilt Chamberlain the Babe Ruth of the NBA? It just tells you all you need to know. Babe Ruth is the greatest legend of all time.
I think about it like this. Wilt Chamberlain is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. You've got Kareem in that argument, Bill Russell. But when you look at Babe, it comes down to one thing. You can't tell the story of baseball. You can't think about baseball without starting at Babe Ruth, period.
That's fair. So it sounds to me like you're saying Babe Ruth moving on?
Yes, Babe Ruth moves on.
All right. There you have it, ladies and gents. We have come down to our final 2. It is Babe Ruth versus Jim Brown. I know who I'm leaning towards. Let me get your thought.
All right, so here's the funny thing about Jim Brown. Barry Sanders, another great legend of football. His father didn't even think Barry Sanders was the best running back in the NFL. He thought Jim Brown was.
There you go.
So that's a shout out to Jim Brown.
However, going back to arguments earlier in the program, when you just talk about things in life and in pop culture, if you're talking about legends, you're comparing them to Babe Ruth and nobody else. And so that's why I would say Ruth would move on.
Jim Brown is so dominant. When I was a kid, he played for the Browns. I thought they named the team after him until I was educated and figured that was the owner. But I was a child. That was my latest. I've grown out of that. But I will say this. Baseball and Babe Ruth go together. That's just how it is. It's Americana. It's the pastime. It is everything that we've known. The great Bambino. You know what I'm saying? It's all about Ruth. I can't believe it.
Come over to my
Jim
side.
Brown.
It is
Shout
indeed.
out, buddy.
Babe Ruth, the greatest sports legend in our minds.
Yes.
Of all time. And it's interesting because we talked about it on the beginning of the show. We didn't include folks that were not on Greatest Sports Legends, so there were some folks that weren't in part of our list. So you got names like Jordan and Brady and Gretzky and Tiger. Great sports legends.
Payton
but
Manning.
even with all of them, one by one, if you put them up against Babe Ruth, I think we still found our man.
And I think it's quite fitting because, frankly put, Babe Ruth is awesome.
Yeah, I'm exhausted, so I don't know about you.
Too. But look, as far as I'm concerned, it's time for us to slide on out of here. But we couldn't do it without ending this episode with Roger Kahn, who asked Jumpin' Joe Dugan, a teammate of Babe Ruth's, by the way, hey, can you do us a favor and describe the Babe?
He said, to understand him, you had to understand this. He wasn't human. He was an animal. No human could have done the things he did, lived the way he did, and been that kind of ball player. Cobb, could he pitch? Speaker, the rest, I saw them. There was never anybody close. You gotta figure he was more than an animal even. There never was anyone like him. And then in his old man's voice, Joe Dugan said, he was a god.